August 1943, Kursk. The Kursk salient was the largest tank battle in human history. 2 million soldiers were converging on a single region. Hundreds of thousands of tanks and combat vehicles were moving toward collision. The outcome of this battle would determine the course of the entire war on the Eastern Front. Captain Alexander Kravtsov stood inside a T-34 tank, looking through the commander's periscope at the landscape ahead. The landscape was scarred with trenches. The landscape was lined with barbed wire. The landscape was studded with anti-tank guns. The landscape was a nightmare of fortified German positions stretching to the horizon. Kravtsov was 34 years old. Kravtsov had been commanding tanks since 1941. Kravtsov had survived 3 years of war. This fact alone, that he had survived 3 years, was remarkable. Most Soviet tank commanders did not survive 3 years. Most Soviet tank commanders were killed in their first engagement, or their second, or their third. Kravtsov had survived because he understood something fundamental about tank warfare that many commanders did not understand. Kravtsov understood that a tank was not simply a machine. A tank was people. A tank was a commander who could make correct decisions under pressure. A tank was a gunner who could accurately aim and fire. A tank was a driver who could maneuver the tank through complex terrain under fire. A tank was a radio operator who could maintain communication. A tank was a loader who could work at high speed under extreme stress. The best tanks were not the ones with the most armor or the most powerful guns. The best tanks were the ones where the crew functioned as a single organism. The best tanks were the ones where each member of the crew understood his role and the roles of the other crew members so completely that they could coordinate without words, without hesitation, without the delays that came from thinking about what to do next. Kravtsov's tank had such a crew. The driver was Sergeant Ivan Petrov. Petrov was from a farm outside Moscow. Petrov had no formal mechanical training. Petrov had been a farmer before the war, but Petrov possessed a gift. Petrov could feel the tank through his hands. Petrov could sense the ground beneath the tracks. Petrov could anticipate how the tank would respond to terrain. Petrov could make a T-34 move with precision that seemed almost impossible. Other tank commanders had requested to have Petrov as their driver. Kravtsov had made it clear that Petrov was his driver and would remain his driver. The gunner was Senior Sergeant Dmitry Orlov. Orlov was from Leningrad. Orlov had been a sharpshooter before the war. Orlov had won marksmanship competitions. Orlov brought that same precision to tank gunnery. Orlov could hit a target at 800 meters. Orlov could hit a moving target. Orlov could predict where an enemy tank would move and fire it where it would be, not where it was. The loader was Private Mikhail Sokolov. Sokolov was 19 years old. Sokolov had never done any work more demanding than helping his father at a carpentry shop, but Sokolov had learned to load a tank gun in under 6 seconds. Sokolov had learned to anticipate Orlov's needs. Sokolov could reach for the next round before Orlov even asked for it. The radio operator was Corporal Alexei Volkov. Volkov kept the tank connected to the rest of the brigade. Volkov transmitted information. Volkov received orders. Volkov knew when to speak and when to stay silent. 5 men. 1 tank. Together, they were a unit that Soviet commanders had begun to notice. Together, they were becoming a legend. On August 5th, Kravtsov received his orders. His tank was to move with the 181st Tank Brigade to attack the German defensive line south of Kursk. The German defensive line was formidable. The Germans had prepared this position carefully. The Germans expected the Soviet attack. The Germans had positioned anti-tank guns, mines, and prepared counterattacks. Kravtsov's tanks, 12 of them in his company, would lead the assault. Kravtsov's tank would be the spearhead. Kravtsov would lead the breakthrough. Kravtsov gathered his crew inside the tank. Kravtsov explained the mission. Kravtsov did not minimize the danger. Kravtsov was honest about the fact that some tanks would not come back. Kravtsov was honest about the fact that some crew members would not come back. Then Kravtsov said something that Orlov would remember for the rest of his life. The Germans expect us to charge straight at them. The Germans expect us to die. The Germans expect us to fail. We will not meet their expectations. We will move like a single organism. We will respond as one. And when the moment comes to strike, we will strike with precision. This tank, this crew, will break through. This crew will survive. This crew will achieve what the Germans think is impossible. Kravtsov was not a great orator. Kravtsov was not a propaganda officer. Kravtsov was simply a tank commander telling his crew the truth. But in that moment, something shifted. Something changed in the crew. They understood that their commander believed in them. They understood that their commander believed they could do the impossible. On the morning of August 5th at 6 o'clock, Soviet artillery began its bombardment. Shells fell on the German defensive line for 2 hours. The earth shook. Dust rose. Smoke covered everything. At 8 o'clock, the bombardment stopped. In the silence that followed, Soviet tanks began to move. Columns of T-34 tanks moved toward the German defensive line. Kravtsov's tank was at the front of the first column. "Petrov," Kravtsov commanded, "move us forward. Zigzag pattern. Do not give the Germans a stable target." Petrov understood. Petrov had been trained by 3 years of war to understand what Kravtsov meant. Petrov moved the tank forward, but not in a straight line. Petrov moved the tank left, then right, then left again. The tank moved at 30 kilometers per hour. The tank moved toward the German line. German anti-tank guns opened fire. The first shot hit a T-34 behind Kravtsov. The tank erupted in flames. Crew members jumped from the tank, burning. They fell to the ground and stopped moving. "Volkov," Kravtsov commanded, "report the loss. Keep moving." German anti-tank guns continued to fire. More T-34 tanks were hit. More tanks erupted in flames. But Kravtsov's tank continued forward. Petrov's zigzag pattern had confused the German gunners. The German gunners were calculating targeting solutions, and by the time they fired, the tank had moved. "Orlov," Kravtsov commanded, "German anti-tank position at 2 o'clock. Distance approximately 600 meters. Orlov looked through his scope. Orlov saw the muzzle flash. Orlov calculated the distance. Orlov aimed the gun. Orlov fired. The anti-tank gun exploded. German soldiers who had been manning the gun were thrown into the air. The anti-tank position was eliminated. Kravtsov's tank continued forward. More German anti-tank guns fired. More T-34 tanks died around them. But Kravtsov's tank continued forward. Soviet infantry moved behind the tanks, using the tanks for cover, clearing German positions. By 10 o'clock, the German defensive line was breaking. Soviet forces had achieved a breakthrough. Soviet tanks were pouring through the breakthrough. Soviet motorized infantry was moving through the breakthrough. The German defense was collapsing. Kravtsov's tank had made the breakthrough possible. Kravtsov's tank was still combat effective. Kravtsov's tank had proven that Kravtsov's faith in his crew was justified. The crew had functioned as a single organism. The crew had worked without hesitation. The crew had achieved the impossible. But the battle was far from over. The day was just beginning. German reserves were moving to counterattack. German tanks were moving toward the breakthrough. The battle would continue for weeks. And Kravtsov's tank would be in the middle of it. But on August 5th, 1943, for the first time in his life as a tank commander, Kravtsov allowed himself to believe that his tank might actually survive this war. August 6th through 8th, 1943. Kravtsov's tank continued to operate near the front lines of the breakthrough. Soviet forces were consolidating their success. German forces were attempting to contain the breakthrough. The battle was not yet decided. On the afternoon of August 6th, Kravtsov received new orders. His tank was to move with a motorized infantry company to eliminate a German anti-tank position that was impeding Soviet advance. The position was located approximately 3 kilometers ahead. The position was defended by approximately 20 German soldiers and 4 anti-tank guns. Kravtsov gathered his crew and explained the mission. Petrov would navigate the terrain. Orlov would identify and eliminate the anti-tank guns. Sokolov would maintain ammunition supply. Volkov would maintain communication with the brigade. "This is straightforward," Kravtsov said. "We will move forward. We will find the position. We will destroy it. The infantry will consolidate. We will move forward again." Any questions? There were no questions. The crew understood their roles. The tank moved forward with infantry following behind. The infantry used the tank as a mobile shield. The tank provided fire support. The infantry provided protection against anti-tank teams that might attempt to disable the tank at close range. At 2 o'clock, the German anti-tank position opened fire. The first shot from a German anti-tank gun struck the tank's left tread. Sparks flew, metal clanged, but the tread held. "Orlov," Kravtsov commanded. "German anti-tank position at 10 o'clock, approximately 400 meters. Orlov found the position through his scope. Orlov saw the muzzle flash. Orlov calculated the distance. Orlov aimed the gun. Orlov fired. The anti-tank gun exploded. German soldiers scrambled to abandon the position, but 2 other anti-tank guns began firing. Rounds struck the tank. The tank rocked from impact. Inside the tank, the crew was jostled violently. "Petrov," Kravtsov commanded, "move us left, 30 meters, then right 30 meters. Keep moving." Petrov understood. Petrov was already anticipating the command. Petrov had already begun to move the tank left. Petrov moved the tank in an irregular pattern. The anti-tank gunners were calculating targeting solutions, but by the time they fired, the tank had moved. Orlov identified the second anti-tank gun. Orlov fired. The second anti-tank gun exploded. The third anti-tank gun was well concealed. Orlov could not find it immediately. But Kravtsov had seen the muzzle flash. Kravtsov knew where the gun was located. "Orlov," Kravtsov said, "look at that barn. See the corner? The anti-tank gun is positioned there." Orlov looked. Orlov saw the barn. Orlov saw the corner. Orlov did not see the anti-tank gun. But Orlov trusted Kravtsov's assessment. Orlov aimed at the location Kravtsov had indicated. Orlov fired. The anti-tank gun exploded. The barn partially collapsed. "Petrov," Kravtsov commanded, "charge the position, full speed, do not stop." Petrov understood. Petrov understood that speed was more important than caution now. Petrov pushed the throttle. The tank accelerated. The tank moved at 40 kilometers per hour directly toward the German position. German soldiers who had survived the destruction of the anti-tank guns began to run. German soldiers understood that a charging tank meant death. German soldiers were abandoning the position. Infantry moved behind the tank. Infantry entered the position. Infantry moved through the position, eliminating any German soldiers who had not fled. By 3 o'clock, the position was eliminated. German forces had lost 4 anti-tank guns and approximately 16 soldiers killed. Soviet forces had achieved their objective. Kravtsov's tank had led the assault. Kravtsov's tank had eliminated the anti-tank position. Kravtsov's tank had made the infantry's task possible. But Kravtsov also understood that the tank had taken damage. The tread had been hit. The armor had been dented. The engine had been strained by the high-speed charge. Kravtsov ordered the tank to move to a repair position. The repair position was approximately 2 kilometers behind the current front lines. Petrov navigated the tank to the repair position, while Kravtsov communicated with the brigade commander. At the repair position, maintenance personnel examined the tank. The tread would need repair. The armor was dented but not penetrated. The engine showed signs of stress but appeared operational. The maintenance crew worked for 3 hours. The crew worked while German artillery occasionally fell nearby. The crew worked while Soviet soldiers moved past them, going forward to attack German positions. By 6 o'clock, the tank had been repaired. The tank was combat effective again. Kravtsov's crew returned to the tank. Kravtsov received new orders. The new orders were to move back to the divisional assembly area. Kravtsov's tank had been operating almost continuously for 48 hours. The crew was exhausted. The tank needed more comprehensive maintenance. Kravtsov gave the command, "Petrov, take us back to the assembly area. Full speed. Be careful of mines." Petrov understood. Petrov navigated the tank back through Soviet lines. Petrov moved the tank carefully through areas where mines might have been placed. Petrov understood that a mine was more dangerous than enemy fire right now. At the assembly area, Kravtsov's tank was surrounded by other Soviet tanks. The assembly area was a Soviet logistics depot. The depot had repair facilities, ammunition storage, fuel storage, and medical tents. The crew dismounted from the tank. The crew stretched. The crew walked stiffly. 3 days of continuous combat had taken physical and psychological toll. But as the crew rested, Kravtsov did something unusual. Kravtsov gathered his crew and said, "You have proven something over the past 3 days. You have proven that you are among the best tank crews in the Soviet army. You have destroyed 2 tanks. You have destroyed 4 anti-tank guns. You have killed or wounded perhaps 30 enemy soldiers. You have enabled the breakthrough that has changed the entire tactical situation in this sector. The Germans will be telling stories about this tank. The German commanders will be asking their intelligence officers, 'What is this tank that we cannot kill?' And do you know what the answer will be? The answer will be that they did not face a tank. They faced us. They faced a crew that functions as one. The Germans understand tanks. The Germans understand firepower. But the Germans do not understand cohesion. The Germans do not understand what it means for 5 men to trust each other so completely that they move and think as one organism. This is why they cannot kill us. This is why we will survive. This is why we will win." The crew listened to Kravtsov's words. The crew understood that their commander was not simply boosting morale. Their commander was telling them the truth. Their commander understood that they were special. Their commander believed in them. Over the next few days, while the tank was being serviced and the crew was resting, rumors began to circulate through the Soviet forces at Kursk. The rumors were about a tank that had survived 2 German tanks, a tank that had destroyed multiple anti-tank positions, a tank that seemed to be everywhere on the front lines, a tank that could not be killed. Other tank commanders began to ask about this tank. Other tank crews began to want to serve with this tank. Soviet commanders began to consider using Kravtsov's tank as a spearhead for other attacks. Kravtsov's tank was beginning to become a legend. August 12, 1943. Kravtsov's tank received new orders. The Soviet breakthrough at Kursk was consolidating. German counterattacks were being launched. The battle had entered a new phase, the phase of exploitation and counterattack. Kravtsov's brigade was assigned to exploit the breakthrough. Kravtsov's brigade was to move rapidly westward, disrupting German rear area operations. Kravtsov's brigade was to destroy German command posts, supply depots, and reserves being moved to the front. This mission was different from defensive operations. This mission required speed. This mission required independent decision-making. This mission required that Kravtsov make decisions without waiting for orders from brigade headquarters. On the morning of August 12th, Kravtsov's tank was leading a column of 8 T-34 tanks and 2 mechanized infantry companies. The column was moving westward at 20 kilometers per hour. The column was moving through German-occupied territory that had been recently abandoned by German forces. The landscape was scarred. Villages had been destroyed. German positions had been abandoned. German soldiers who had not retreated were either captured or dead. At midday, Orlov reported from his position in the gun turret. "Commander, I see movement approximately 2 kilometers ahead. Trucks, German trucks." Kravtsov looked through his periscope. Kravtsov saw what Orlov had described. German trucks were moving northward along a road that crossed the column's path. Kravtsov made an immediate decision. Kravtsov's tank would attack the German convoy. Kravtsov's supporting tanks would provide covering fire. The motorized infantry would consolidate the position after the attack. "Petrov," Kravtsov commanded. "Change course. Head for that road. 20 kilometers per hour." Petrov understood immediately. Petrov understood that the Germans had no idea that Soviet tanks were approaching. Petrov understood that surprise was total. The column changed direction. The tank column moved toward the German convoy. "Orlov," Kravtsov commanded. "When we are within 1,000 meters, you will open fire. Target the lead truck first, then work your way back through the convoy. Kill as many trucks as you can before they scatter." Orlov acknowledged. Orlov was already calculating distances. Orlov was already preparing to fire. At 900 meters, the German convoy suddenly saw the Soviet tanks. The German convoy began to scatter. German trucks veered off the road. German soldiers began to jump from the trucks. But it was too late. The Soviet tanks opened fire. Kravtsov's tank fired first. Orlov's first shot struck the lead German truck directly. The truck erupted in flames. Orlov fired again. The second truck was hit. The second truck swerved off the road and overturned. The other Soviet tanks were firing now. Truck after truck was being hit. German soldiers were jumping from trucks and running for cover. But there was no cover. The landscape was flat and barren. German soldiers were exposed. Kravtsov's tank continued to move forward. Orlov continued to fire. Kravtsov continued to command. Within minutes, the entire German convoy was destroyed. Approximately 15 trucks were burning. Approximately 80 German soldiers were dead or wounded. German ammunition, food, and supplies were burning on the road. Kravtsov's tank had destroyed in 5 minutes what would have taken German logistics weeks to replace. Kravtsov ordered the column to continue. Kravtsov understood that staying in one position was dangerous. German aircraft or German reserves might be moving toward this position. The column moved on. Over the next 3 days, Kravtsov's column destroyed 3 more German convoys. Kravtsov's tank killed or destroyed approximately 60 vehicles. Kravtsov's tank killed or wounded approximately 300 German soldiers. But Kravtsov also understood that exploiting a breakthrough was dangerous. German forces might be setting ambushes. German forces might be waiting in prepared positions. On August 15th, Kravtsov received a report that a German mechanized column was moving toward his position. The German column was substantial, approximately 20 vehicles and supporting infantry. Kravtsov made a decision. Kravtsov's column would establish a blocking position. Kravtsov's column would force the German column to either attack or retreat. Kravtsov selected a defensive position on rising terrain. The position provided good fields of fire. The position allowed Soviet forces to see approaching German forces from a distance. The German column appeared at 1400 hours. The German column saw the Soviet blocking position and began to deploy for attack. Kravtsov watched through his periscope as German soldiers dismounted from their vehicles. German soldiers began to move toward the Soviet position in assault formations. "Orlov," Kravtsov commanded. "German infantry assembling at 900 meters. Machine gun fire first. Keep them pinned. Wait for the armor." Kravtsov's tank's machine gunner opened fire. German infantry that had been advancing suddenly found themselves under intense machine gun fire. German soldiers dropped to the ground. German soldiers began to return fire, but the German return fire was ineffective against the tank. German rifles and light machine guns could not penetrate tank armor at distance. Then German anti-tank guns opened fire from the flanks. German anti-tank guns that had been concealed began to fire at the Soviet tanks. "Petrov," Kravtsov commanded. "Move us left. Get behind that ridge." Petrov understood. Petrov moved the tank. The tank moved behind a ridge that provided protection from the German anti-tank guns. "Orlov," Kravtsov commanded. "Do you have the anti-tank position?" "Yes, Commander," Orlov replied. "Approximately 600 meters. I have it targeted." "Fire," Kravtsov commanded. Orlov fired. The German anti-tank gun position erupted in smoke and flame. The anti-tank gun was destroyed, but a second anti-tank gun opened fire from a different position. This German anti-tank gun was more difficult to locate. Kravtsov made a decision. Kravtsov's tank would move aggressively toward the German position. Kravtsov's tank would assault the German anti-tank gun before it could fire again. "Petrov," Kravtsov commanded. "Full speed. Charge the position. Do not stop." Petrov understood. Petrov pushed the throttle. The tank accelerated. The tank moved at 40 kilometers per hour, directly toward the location where Kravtsov estimated the German anti-tank gun was positioned. The German anti-tank gun fired. The shell missed by less than a meter. Kravtsov's tank continued to charge. Another shot. This shot hit the tank's left side armor. The tank rocked from impact but continued moving. Kravtsov's tank was now very close. Orlov fired the machine gun at point-blank range. German anti-tank crews were mowed down. The German anti-tank gun was captured intact. The German assault on the Soviet position collapsed. German forces began to retreat. German soldiers were running back toward their vehicles. German vehicles were beginning to move backward. Kravtsov's supporting tanks advanced. Soviet infantry advanced. German forces were pushed back. Within an hour, the German attack had been completely repulsed. German forces retreated. Soviet forces consolidated the position. Kravtsov's tank had survived another engagement. Kravtsov's tank had destroyed 2 German anti-tank guns and killed or wounded approximately 200 German soldiers. That night, while the tank was being refueled and rearmed, Kravtsov sat on top of the tank and looked at the landscape around him. The landscape was littered with German vehicles. The landscape was covered with German dead and wounded. Kravtsov understood something fundamental. Kravtsov understood that his tank was not just surviving. Kravtsov's tank was becoming increasingly legendary. German soldiers were beginning to fear this tank. German commanders were beginning to organize operations specifically to destroy this tank. Kravtsov understood that this attention was both an advantage and a danger. The advantage was that his tank was becoming a symbol of Soviet strength. The danger was that the Germans would eventually concentrate sufficient force to destroy his tank. But for now, for this moment in August 1943, Kravtsov's tank remained undefeated. Kravtsov's tank remained in the field. Kravtsov's tank continued to operate, and the legend of Kravtsov's tank continued to grow. September 1943 through December 1943. Kravtsov's tank continued to operate across the vast Soviet territory as German forces retreated. The tank participated in the liberation of Ukraine. The tank crossed rivers. The tank engaged in continuous combat. By December, the tank had officially destroyed 3 additional German tanks. The tank had destroyed 12 anti-tank guns. The tank had destroyed or damaged approximately 100 vehicles. The official kill count was approaching levels that seemed almost fictional. But the tank was also showing signs of stress. The engine was experiencing mechanical failures. The transmission was making unusual sounds. The hull had been hit so many times that patches had been welded over punctures. The tank looked battle-worn. The tank looked like it had survived things that tanks were not supposed to survive. In late November, Kravtsov made a decision. Kravtsov requested that his tank be sent to a major repair facility. The tank needed comprehensive overhaul. The tank needed new engine components. The tank needed new transmission parts. The tank needed to be rebuilt, not just repaired. Brigade headquarters approved the request. In December, Kravtsov's tank was transported on a heavy flatbed truck back to a Soviet tank repair facility approximately 100 kilometers behind the front lines. The repair facility was a massive complex. The facility had hundreds of workers. The facility had machine shops. The facility had welding equipment. The facility had spare parts for dozens of different tank models. Kravtsov's tank arrived at the facility looking like a mechanical corpse. The tank looked like it should have been destroyed months ago. The tank looked like a machine that had been pushed beyond all reasonable limits. The repair technicians examined the tank. The repair technicians spent 3 days documenting the damage. The damage was extensive. The damage was spread throughout the entire machine. The damage suggested that this tank had survived things that would have destroyed normal tanks. The chief repair technician, a man named Colonel Ivan Meshkov, examined the tank personally. Meshkov was one of the most experienced tank maintenance officers in the Soviet Army. Meshkov had been maintaining tanks since the beginning of the war. After his examination, Meshkov told Kravtsov, "Captain, this tank is a miracle. This tank should have been destroyed many times over. The damage here is not from simple combat wear. The damage here suggests repeated exposure to armor-piercing rounds. The damage here suggests explosions. The damage here suggests a tank that has been in the most intense combat possible." "Can you fix it?" Kravtsov asked. "Yes," Meshkov replied. "But it will take time. We will need to replace the engine completely. We will need to rebuild the transmission. We will need to re-weld the hull in multiple places. We will need to replace or repair almost every internal component." "How long?" Kravtsov asked. 3 weeks, Meshkov replied. "Perhaps 4 weeks if we encounter unexpected problems." Kravtsov nodded. Kravtsov understood that his tank would be out of service for approximately a month. Kravtsov understood that during this month, Soviet forces would continue to fight. Soviet forces would continue to advance. Soviet tanks would continue to fight and die. But Kravtsov also understood that his tank needed this repair. Kravtsov understood that pushing the tank beyond its limits would result in catastrophic failure. Kravtsov understood that the machine could not survive forever without significant reconstruction. During the 3 weeks while his tank was being repaired, Kravtsov spent time with his crew. Kravtsov and his crew were sent to a rest and training facility. The crew was given time to recover from 3 months of continuous combat. Petrov had been suffering from hearing loss from the constant noise of the tank engine. Petrov had been suffering from back pain from the constant vibration and jarring of tank movement. Petrov was allowed to rest. Petrov was examined by a doctor. Petrov was treated. Orlov had been suffering from eye strain from constantly looking through the gun sight. Orlov had been suffering from stress. Orlov was allowed to rest. Orlov was given eyeglasses to help with his vision. Orlov was treated. Sokolov, despite his age, was in relatively good condition. Sokolov had been toughened by combat. Sokolov had learned to endure physical hardship. Sokolov used the rest period to write letters home to his family. One evening, the crew gathered around a fire. Kravtsov sat with them. Kravtsov wanted to discuss something important. "The tank is being repaired," Kravtsov said. "When the tank is ready, we will return to combat. But I want you to understand something. What we have accomplished over the past 3 months is unusual. What we have accomplished is being noticed, not just by our own command, but by German command as well." "What does that mean, Commander?" Petrov asked.
"It means," Kravtsov replied, "that the Germans are now specifically organizing operations to destroy our tank. It means that German reserves are being positioned to hunt our tank. It means that when we return to combat, we will be fighting against forces that are specifically prepared to kill us." The crew was silent. The crew understood what Kravtsov was saying. "But," Kravtsov continued, "it also means that our tank has become a symbol. Our tank has become proof that the Soviet army can compete with German armor. Our tank has become proof that courage and skill and cohesion can overcome numerical disadvantage. Our tank has become a reason for Soviet soldiers to believe that they can win this war." Kravtsov looked at each member of his crew. Kravtsov said, "When we return to combat, some of us may not come back. The Germans will be trying harder to kill us. But I believe that we will survive. I believe that this tank will survive. And I believe that we will help to defeat Germany." In late December, Kravtsov's tank emerged from the repair facility. The tank looked new. The tank looked like a machine that had just been manufactured. The tank looked like a machine that had been given a second life. Kravtsov climbed into the tank. Kravtsov felt the difference immediately. The engine was smooth. The transmission was responsive. The hydraulics moved without hesitation. The tank felt like a brand new machine. But inside the tank, there was still something else. There was the history of 3 months of combat. There was the memory of every battle. There was the understanding that this machine and this crew had survived what should have been unsurvivable. Kravtsov gave the command, "Petrov, take us back to the front. It is time to continue our war." Petrov pushed the throttle. The tank moved forward. The tank was returning to combat. And the legend of Kravtsov's tank was about to enter a new chapter. January 1944 through May 1944, Kravtsov's tank returned to combat operations. The tank participated in Soviet offensives designed to liberate Soviet territory. The tank fought in extreme cold. The tank fought in mud. The tank fought in conditions that tested every system of the machine. Kravtsov's tank encountered a Tiger I tank in February. The Tiger I was one of the best German tanks in the world. The Tiger I had armor that was nearly impenetrable from long range. The Tiger I had a powerful gun that could destroy a T-34 from over 1,000 meters away. But Kravtsov understood Tiger I tactics. Kravtsov understood that Tiger I commanders were trained to fight at range. Kravtsov understood that the Tiger I was slower than the T-34. Kravtsov understood that to defeat a Tiger I, a T-34 had to close distance rapidly. When the Tiger I appeared, Kravtsov gave his commands. "Petrov, charge the Tiger, full speed, do not deviate. Orlov, wait for close range. Do not fire until we are within 400 meters." Petrov understood. Petrov pushed the throttle to maximum. The T-34 accelerated. The T-34 moved directly at the Tiger I at 35 kilometers per hour. The Tiger I opened fire. The shell passed over the T-34. The Tiger I adjusted. The Tiger I fired again. The second shell also missed.
The T-34 was moving too erratically. The T-34 was moving too fast for the Tiger I's gun crew to calculate a firing solution. At 450 meters, Orlov opened fire. Orlov's first shot hit the Tiger I's side armor. The Tiger I was damaged but not destroyed. The Tiger I returned fire. The shell hit the T-34's front armor. The impact was violent, but the T-34 continued to charge. Orlov fired again. This time the shell struck the Tiger I's turret. The turret was damaged. The Tiger I's gun fell silent. The Tiger I's crew was incapacitated or dead. Kravtsov's tank had defeated a Tiger I, one of the most feared German tanks.
Kravtsov's tank had proven that skill and aggressive tactics could overcome superior firepower and armor. By April, Kravtsov's tank had officially destroyed 5 German tanks. The tank had destroyed over 30 anti-tank guns. The tank had destroyed or damaged approximately 200 vehicles. The official count was reaching legendary proportions, but the tank was also accumulating damage. The hull was scarred with impacts. The turret had been hit so many times that it was difficult to rotate smoothly. The engine was showing signs of age despite the major overhaul. The tank was aging rapidly. In May 1944, during an offensive operation in Belarus, Kravtsov's tank encountered German Panther tanks, medium tanks with superior firepower and armor compared to the T-34. Kravtsov's tank was part of a Soviet tank company attacking a German defensive position. The company consisted of 5 T-34 tanks. The German defensive position contained 3 Panther tanks. The Panther tanks opened fire first. The Panthers had superior gun range. The Panthers opened fire at 1,000 meters. Soviet shells could not penetrate Panther armor at that distance. Soviet tanks were being hit. Soviet tanks were burning. But Kravtsov made a decision. Kravtsov would charge. Kravtsov would close the distance. Kravtsov would force the Panther tanks into close combat, where the T-34's superior maneuverability could be used. "All tanks," Kravtsov commanded into the radio. "Follow me. Charge the position. Full speed. Do not stop for anything." The Soviet tanks charged. The Panther tanks continued to fire. Soviet tanks were hit. One Soviet tank erupted in flames. But the remaining Soviet tanks continued to charge. At 600 meters, the Soviet tanks' guns became effective. Soviet shells began to penetrate Panther armor. The first Panther was hit. The Panther was damaged. The Panther returned fire. Its shell struck Kravtsov's tank. The impact was violent. Inside Kravtsov's tank, explosion. Metal shrapnel. Smoke. Alarms sounding. Kravtsov felt burning in his leg. Kravtsov understood that he had been hit by shrapnel. But Kravtsov's tank continued to move. Orlov continued to fire. The gun fired. The shell struck the first Panther. The Panther erupted in flames. Orlov adjusted fire. Orlov fired at the second Panther. Hit. The second Panther was damaged. The third Panther was hit by fire from another Soviet tank. The third Panther began to burn. The German defensive position was broken. German forces retreated. Soviet forces consolidated the position. But Kravtsov's tank had been severely damaged. The penetration had caused significant internal damage. The tank was still functional, but barely. Kravtsov was injured. Kravtsov's leg was bleeding. Kravtsov was in pain. Medical personnel extracted Kravtsov from the tank. Kravtsov was evacuated to a medical facility. Kravtsov had internal injuries. Kravtsov had shrapnel in his leg. Kravtsov would require weeks of hospitalization. Kravtsov's tank, meanwhile, was towed back to a repair facility. The damage was severe. The damage required extensive reconstruction. The tank would be out of service for weeks. Petrov, Orlov, and Sokolov were devastated to learn that Kravtsov was evacuated.
Petrov, Orlov, and Sokolov understood that they might not serve with Kravtsov again. They understood that their commander, their leader, the man who had made them believe they were special, was gone. But Kravtsov recovered. Kravtsov spent 6 weeks in the hospital. Kravtsov's physical wounds healed, but Kravtsov also understood that something had changed. Kravtsov understood that his time as an active tank commander was coming to an end. In June 1944, as Kravtsov was recovering, a new tank commander was assigned to replace him. The new commander was competent, but was not Kravtsov. The new commander did not have Kravtsov's experience. The new commander did not have the crew's trust. Kravtsov, upon his recovery, was assigned to brigade headquarters. Kravtsov was appointed as chief of staff. Kravtsov was no longer commanding a tank. Kravtsov was now coordinating multiple tank companies from behind the lines. Kravtsov's active combat service had ended. Kravtsov's direct participation in tank battles was over. But Kravtsov's legacy had been established. Kravtsov's tank would continue to fight under other commanders. Kravtsov's tank would continue to be a symbol of Soviet armor. The question remained: would the tank survive without Kravtsov? Would the tank continue to perform extraordinary feats under new leadership? Or would the legend die when Kravtsov left? The answer would be found in the remaining year of the war, July 1944 through May 1945. Kravtsov's tank continued to fight under new commanders. The tank participated in the liberation of Soviet territory. The tank participated in offensives into Poland. The tank participated in the final assault on Germany. The tank survived because it had been rebuilt so thoroughly that it was nearly a new machine. The tank survived because Petrov, who had been retained as the driver, continued to command respect. Petrov, despite new commanders, continued to perform his duties with the same precision and skill that had made him legendary. By April 1945, as Soviet forces were fighting in the streets of Berlin, Kravtsov's original tank had accumulated an official count of 8 destroyed enemy tanks. The tank had destroyed over 50 anti-tank guns. The tank had been in continuous combat for nearly 2 years. The tank had survived what should have been unsurvivable. But in the final weeks of the war, Kravtsov's tank was hit by a Panzerfaust, a German anti-tank weapon that was effective at close range. The tank was supporting infantry in a German-held building. The Panzerfaust was fired from a window. The shaped charge penetrated the tank's armor. The tank caught fire. The crew evacuated. Petrov was killed while helping other crew members exit the tank. Orlov survived but was severely burned. Sokolov survived. The new commander survived. Kravtsov's tank burned in the streets of Berlin. The machine that had been legendary, that had survived 2 years of continuous combat, that had accumulated kills that rivaled some air forces, was consumed by fire.